Hello, my name is Olurutimiosha. I like talking about American presidents and US history. Today, in honor of Black History Month, I'm going to be discussing um, a very tragic moment in American life, and it shows the intersection of classism, racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Black racism, and classism, which occurred in Atlanta, Georgia, in the uh, the early decades of the 20th century, and um, it's regarding the lynching of Leo Frank, a Jewish man. He was a wealthy Jewish man in Atlanta, Georgia. Um, so, in interestingly, uh, on April 26, 1913, the body of a young 13-year-old factory worker, white female factory worker, Mary Fagan, was found mutilated, beaten in a grotesque fashion in the basement of a factory. The factory of That's the basement of the National Pencil Company where Leo Frank was a manager. And so her corpse was found badly beaten and she'd been strangled. So, uh, of course, the community was incensed, and the police, tried to now find out who was responsible for the killing. And eventually, um, a few days after, a few days after Leo Frank, the manager, was arrested and indicted for murder. There was a subsequent 3-week trial in which Leo Frank, based on uh, testimony of a black man, which is kind of interesting. Testimony of a black man, Jim Conley. He got convicted of the murder of Mary Fagan, the 13-year-old girl, and eventually Leo Frank was convicted, was sentenced to death by hanging by an all-white. He'd been convicted by an all-white male jury. They were lower class, all-white male jury, and eventually his death sentence by hanging was commuted to um, to life imprisonment. But the disgruntled prominent professional class in Georgia, Marietta, Georgia, felt you know that was a sign of injustice because um, uh, the attorney of Leo Frank was a partner of the governor, John Slatton, who commuted the death sentence um, of Leo Frank. In any event, in August of 1915, uh, a group of men, prominent men, would travel into Milledgeville State, Georgia State Prison, and abduct Leo Frank and subsequently hang him in a very grotesque manner. And there were, there's still photos of the brutal, barbaric lynching, and the people, the white men who did the lynching, they weren't wearing hoods or anything like that. Their faces were exposed, were revealed, and so that's what happened. I'm doing this to clarify because I did an earlier video and I talked about how the first time I learned about this lynching was from um, Professor Jonathan Turley, who became my professor at George Washington University Law School. So I did an earlier video and I talked about how he told us about the involvement of a judge in the lynching. So I'd never gone to verify the story, and I just remembered from the details, and that's about, it's been 10 years now. But recently I decided to go and look it up, and I saw that it's actually a rather, famous or infamous lynching. And I studied, some materials as I quickly read a book on it, and I found it kind of really interesting. I'm going to break this video up into two. So it's a very tragic uh, instance of in U.S. history, and so the uh, the judge who was involved in the lynching was he was actually a main organizer. His name was Newt Morris, and of course other lawyers, other professionals were involved in the lynching. And but importantly, there was, the lynching, the conviction, wrongful conviction, was due to a lot of anti-Semitism as well as classism of the times. Um, that era, 1913, 1915, that was the rise of populism and the pushback against the Gilded Age, the wealthy industrialists. And uh, Leo Frank, I'm going to give his backstory. He was an Ivy League. He graduated from Ivy League graduate who graduated from Cornell University. He had a mechanical engineering degree, and he was from New York, right? He moved down south from New York. He'd been encouraged to move to help run the National Pencil Company by his uncle, and so of course, the South was rather impoverished at that time, and so there were the lower class white people, and anti-Semitism had always been rife in the South, and so that conflation, the combination of anti-Semitism, of the blowback, against the rise of industrialism in the South, because the South was still impoverished. Was several years after the Civil War, but the South was still impoverished, and a lot of uh, wealthy industrialists from the North, from New York, this new class was coming in, and with their factory methods, and so there was the pushback against this elite class, and of course the blue collar, uh, lower class white people were against this elite, and so that combination seemed to have you know led to a visceral reaction against Leo Frank, and of course, again, significantly, the testimony of the black man who was a janitor in the National Pencil Company. Uh, his name was Jim Conley. His testimony uh, was very significant, and it makes the case a sort of a landmark, a very groundbreaking case, because it is said that for the first time in Georgia, probably in the South, the whole of the South, a white man was convicted by an all-white jury based on the testimony of a black man. Uh, yeah, the white man was a Jewish man, and so and he was a wealthy Jewish man. He represented a wealthy class. What I found particularly troubling is because there are these still photos of not just the corpse, the mutilated corpse from the lynching, of Leo Frank, dangling from a tree in which his hands are manacled, his hands and feet are manacled, and there's the white circus around him, the mobs, of exposed faces, around him, and it's a barbaric scene, and it just takes us back to the barbaric times in America. We hear of these isolated, random instances of young black men uh, who were found uh, dangling from a tree in apparent suicide cases. Just recently, I think about 2 or so weeks, just a few weeks ago, a young black American person was found in Georgia dangling from a tree in a park. And, his families cried, his expressed their concern that there was foul play. And I think investigations are ongoing. But, we have to point out the abhorrent history of racism and jungle justice in America in defiance of our Constitution and the our ethos. So I'm going to do another video and just get into details and give the backstory of Leo Frank. And it is sad, when you see the still photos of Leo Frank, he doesn't look like a murderer. He seems like a staid figure. He seems unflappable, very composed. He doesn't look like a murderer. And during that time, of course, that was a period of the rise of yellow journalism. That's where journalists have they sensationalize things, they exaggerate, and their objective is to sort of whip up resentment amongst evoke resentment amongst the populace to act. And so there was a journalist named by name of Tom Watson, who was a politician and editor of the Jeffersonian in the South. And he was he was his editorializing was whipping up anti-Semitic and anti very classist sentiments against Leo Frank. And tragically, Leo Frank, who whom historians and evidence sort of exonerates him, shows that that an innocent man was wrongfully convicted, and unfortunately he was wrongfully executed even um, after his um, original death sentence was commuted. The state of Georgia has since, apologized for failing to protect Leo Frank while he was in their custody. Because he was kidnapped uh, in prison by prominent mob, a mob of prominent citizens of Georgia, and they took him into a forest and hanged him there in Marietta, Georgia. Um, it's a very sad, tragic situation, and for someone to be framed, of wrongdoing, and I'm seeing, particularly in the South, I have talked about my story of how I was framed in my own home. The police came like a lynch mob, and they orchestrated a framing, using a man, Jide Wari, and there's an element of classism, and that's why I'm going to do a subsequent video discussing that. Jide Wari is supposed to be a Howard University professor, but to Americans, that those people who love that rags to riches story, he came with nothing, and then he made something of himself, and he went to fabricate all these falsehoods, lies, and he conspired with Montgomery County Police, and obviously he's conspiring with the state attorney's office. I don't know who else, but the thing is, Jide Wari is a depraved liar that sent cops to my home who assaulted me. They staged my neighbor to falsify records. And so you're seeing the criminal conduct of, again, many of the people who are members of the police force in the South, at least in Montgomery County, the members of the KKK and white nationalist groups. These people committed perjury. People like Jeffrey Ray, police officer Jeffrey Ray, police officer DeMarcus Coleman, who's a black man, So you'll always see that, because somebody is black or a certain whatever, it doesn't mean that they're because somebody is black, it doesn't, we can't just assume that they're not racist against black people as well, right? So DeMarcus Coleman is one of those people who is, he lacks character, and these are diabolical instruments of, dark forces that, may manipulate the apparatus of states, and, the story of Leo Frank is jarring for me because today historians are convinced that Leo Frank was framed. He was framed due to his race as a Jewish man, and of course as due to his class, right? As a wealthy man, from the north. And the fact that I've been framed myself, I'm being framed, uh, you know, trumped up charges. Police came to raid me in my home on trumped up charges, and people just fabricated things. I think the most significant thing is the silence of the media, right? And, you know, I want to know the reason why the media is silenced. I have my theory on why the media is silenced, why the media is silent. But in any event, I'm going to do a subsequent video and just give the story from the beginning to the end of the tragic anti-Semitic lynching of Leo Frank, and how tragically uh, a black man who was probably likely, very likely, the murderer of Mary of Mary uh, turned out to be the chief prosecution witness uh, that that led to that caused the conviction of wrongful conviction of Leo Frank. My name's Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.